Awakening is, in my eyes at least, a factor of ripeness. And that ripeness is a factor of grace in many ways. It is not in our hands to wake up, even though it looks that way, even though it feels like that in terms of the lived experience of it. I'm meditating, I'm inquiring, I'm reading this book, I'm going to this satsang, I'm. So it is living out in that manner. It feels like it's a me that is in charge of this. But as we've spoken about many times before, it's certainly my view that we are led through this search by grace into that ripeness that happens. And that ripening is not, it's felt in time, but it's not of time. Why it's so difficult is often down to our conditioning. It's often down to, to point someone, as we just did in this guided meditation, it is fairly simple to point to the ground of our existence, the beingness that we are. It's fairly simple to point to that. However, it's very, very tricky. So you can get a glimpse of that, a sense of that, because it is actually that which is looking out of these eyes. However, the conditioning or the belief or the misunderstanding or misapprehension of what the experience actually is of I, this is where it gets tricky. We have a false notion or a false identity of I. There is an I, but it's not the I we think it is. It's not the small, egoic, thought-based, mind-based, body-based experience, temporary experience. The true I is that essential beingness, that sense of existence, that consciousness, that awareness, from which all is birthed, all is experienced, all arises, including the small sense of self, the small I. So this is where it becomes difficult, and this is the journey that people find themselves on. And it is a journey that, while it can be pointed to that essential beingness that we are, that journey is the unveiling of that in all of experiencing. So you can have a glimpse of that, but as the language some would use, and the language I use, but the language is sort of irrelevant. We can use different words, but the language I use for now is abiding. So that abiding, as in the veils are sufficiently unveiled or see-through enough, those veils of conditioned ideas and beliefs, those false ideas of small I being the seat of who and what I am, that's what's hard. That's what feels hard as well. But it's actually that which is looking to awaken. So there's where the suffering in that context can be felt and known and experienced, is the small I, who is not the true I, is seeking to be enlightened, to be awake, when actually the dropping into the deeper ground of existence in each and every moment reveals the untruth of this, reveals this is just a thought. This is just a belief, a conditioned idea. That's what has to, the ripeness is the letting go of the loyalty to that belief and that thought. This is what's hard. And again, it doesn't come about until the ripeness of that moment that goes, I see. Get it. Not small I, true I, sees that. And the mind can come along then for that journey, knowing its limits at that point. It's the wrong I that thinks it's going to wake up. You wake up from that I. Not the I wakes up. You wake up from that I. This is where diligence and patience come in. The diligence to, when there is that sense of experiencing yourself as a separate I, this is where inquiry kicks in. And again, as we know, inquiry is not about getting an answer and thinking something through, but it is asking a question that starts from the mind, a question, using the mind, using thought, but it's delving through the thought, through the question of, well, who am I? Who's the one that wants to wake up? Who's the one that's suffering here? And just as with this meditation that we just walked through, you come to that sense of beingness. Is that sense of beingness suffering? Or is that sense of beingness aware of the experience of suffering arising? This is the persistence and the diligence, and also the patience, as in to not be thinking of tomorrow, but actually to be sinking into that in this moment. It's not about time, actually. Time, this idea of awakening tomorrow, awakening will happen in the future, or it won't, or this or that. All of that is bound in the thinking mind that is bound by time and space. However, we drop into and down and through and find that deeper ground. The existence of time is irrelevant there, actually, on the essential primordial ground of it, of being. Where is time other than a thought, other than a sensation and an experience, maybe as well? And so these ideas of awakening is not going to happen, or awakening is going to happen, all of this is, for me, an invitation to find that which is not concerned with awakening, concerned with time, concerned with tomorrow, or I'm not getting it, or I am. It doesn't exclude all of that stuff, but it is that which sees all of that stuff. And so there's the diligence, the notice and return, the diligence to engage in that earnestly, to engage in that inquiry until it uproots this idea that you are any of that. It uproots it not through the mind only, but through the direct, lived aha-ness of, that's obvious. There's not even assertion of that's obvious, it just is. It is obvious that I am that beingness, aware of all of this play, all of this experiencing, all of these notions of time and enlightenment and suffering and all of that. And it doesn't diminish all of those experiences, but it gets underneath it. It gets so far underneath it that it's recognized it is all perfect. It is all perfectly playing out. You hear those phrases, nothing to do, nothing to change, nowhere to go. That is true of our essential nature. Paradoxically, all of this other stuff is part of that experience. Sense needs to change, sense needs to grow, go over here, do that. But when we touch the ground of who and what we truly are, all of that is it sort of falls into place. It falls into its rightful place. It's not needing to be gotten rid of at that point. It's just seen for what it is. Even this sense of small I, that belief in I am doing this, I should do that, I'm suffering, I'm not enlightened, I'm not worthy, I'm this, that, all of this is held from that deeper ground, then, is seen from and experienced from that deeper ground. So if that deeper ground is not your abiding recognition, it is a recognition, I feel, a remembrance. Those two words for me are it. It's a recognition and a remembrance of what you already are and always have been. So if that is not abiding, seemingly in time, as in it hasn't been penetrated without a shadow of a doubt into that which is bound in time, what we can do is be diligent to that. Forget about tomorrow, forget about 5 minutes from now, but right here, right now, who and what am I? Where is the ground of being, the sense of existence? Am I not that? And is that not aware of all of these comings and goings, all of these sufferings, all of these thoughts, all of these beliefs, all of the sense that I am a separate entity? Is that not that true who and what you are? Is that not aware of even the sense of separation? The experience, the seeming, doesn't feel like an experience. That's where the identification with it, no, it's not an experience, but are you not aware of that too? So it is an experience. And to speak to suffering just a little bit more, maybe a little bit generalized. Suffering is acutely linked. That's not quite the right word, but that's what we got right now. With a lack of clarity. And that's not a judgment as in, like, that's a technical thing I'm saying there. That there's unclear seeing of our nature is what births the sense of suffering. So if we are suffering, there are some temporary alleviating measures that we can encourage in our life, obviously, to do with suffering. But the long-term solution, quote, solution to suffering is the clarity of the nature of existence, the nature of reality. It's my experience that both and can be true, that on a relative surface level, we can be addressing the seeming effects of suffering and the superficial causes of suffering. Things like expectations, things like grasping, attachment, these kinds of things. Both and. So that and we can fundamentally be addressing the cause of suffering, the unending cessation ceases to exist. Suffering ceases to exist. On the fundamental level, we recognize that who and what we are is not suffering, essentially. And this is where we come to understand that even if there is a surface level of suffering, our nature, our true nature, does not suffer. And to have clarity of that, this is where we fundamentally don't suffer in life anymore. Even if there is a temporary arising of what seems like suffering. People ask me this all the time, do I suffer? And it's to say, on a fundamental, deep sense of my existence and my movement in life, no, not at all. But on a relative, yeah, there can still be some pretty challenging experiences of life. There can be a temporary arising of what we would call suffering, all held within this deeper ground that is in total surrender, as in total acceptance of what is, in total love, in total welcoming of what is. And that, to me, is to not suffer. And it's not a prescription as in something I've got to do. It's a description of something we are.